I am 12.
And I look 30. That's perfect. So we're both representing the disabled today. Kostas has a busted shoulder, I have a busted knee, so. All right, so this is gonna be a really informal conversation, but we have an approved list here. All right.
Super.
So, Kostas, introduce yourself.
Should I?
Yeah.
So my name is Kostas. I'm the CEO of a company that used to be called Data Artisans. We recently were renamed to Ververica. So where we're coming from is that we built this open source technology called Apache Flink that lets companies process their data in real time. This is now being used by pretty much all the services that we use daily, things like Netflix, Uber, Lyft, Airbnb, basically you name it. So pretty much all the online services kind of use this in the background to offer their service to us in real time. And it also applies to enterprise, to companies like banks or telcos, so very broad technology.
Good. And I'm Karen Stafford. I'm representing Intel Capital, Regional Director of Central, Northern, Eastern Europe, and other parts beyond. So, all right, so tell a little bit about what it's like to raise funding and find investors in your journey. I think it'll be very helpful to some of the newer founders to share openly and vulnerably about some of your experiences, because he and I can talk forever, but we agreed to be very open.
Yeah, I mean, I can only talk from my experience, right? So when I was starting out, being the CEO of this company was actually my first job. I was coming out of university. So I didn't know much about investments or anything like that. My first investor is actually sitting back there in the room. Hi, Florian.
Stand up. Our favorite human, Florian, B2V.
So for me, it was hard. So I was a very technical person, didn't understand finance. So it took a lot of learning, let's say. And especially for us, because we were doing an open source enterprise business in Europe, we were one of the first ones. Well, not the first one, but it's not really mainstream. So it was kind of hard to find investors that could buy into this business model back then, I would say.
Okay. And what were you looking for in an investor then, and versus what would you look for in an investor with all your experience in an exit now?
So, I mean, I think the same thing. So what I have learned is that it's super, super important the person that you are working with. So there's the firm, there's the name of the firm, but the person is super important. It can change the whole experience.
Yeah.
So having a personal connection with a person, being able to actually work together, like even would you imagine just working together every day with that person? I think that's super important. Having a high bandwidth connection, really getting on each other. Being able to have a very constructive ping pong, I think super important.
If you can't wake your investor or your board member up at 7 a.m. before they've gotten out of bed and had coffee, then you really don't have a relationship with them, right?
That's right. That's right.
We did that frequently.
I called you many times before your coffee.
Yes, yes. And for those of who know me, before coffee is a really scary time. Okay, so. Speaking of scary stories, you shared with me an awful story about early term sheets and early investing, and much like dating, you got ghosted.
I got ghosted, yeah.
Yeah, you want to tell?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, of course, we're not going to name anyone here, but I had the experience that, I had a signed term sheet, and then nobody was replying to my emails. Yeah. And by that time, you have actually make a bet and put your trust in an investor, and then that's kind of shitty.
They didn't return calls,
nothing,
email. They just kind of disappeared.
Nothing. They came back to me, I think, 1 year after and said sorry.
So sorry. Do you want to date again? Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Okay. So. What would you warn other founders about that surprised you in the process? And you can name any part in the journey that you want to talk about. I think a lot of people here would be interested in raising as well as exiting, but what were you surprised about?
Fundraising process, yeah. So, I mean, I think the hardest thing for me was that whenever I was fundraising, and sometimes this actually can drag on and take a while, then basically everybody at the company is unhappy because you're not there, you're kind of doing something else, your attention is not in the company, it's somewhere else. Everybody just starts having issues, so it's always kind of a thing like that. Like whenever, after the fundraising, you always have to go back and repair things and put your attention back in the company and the people and do the work. I think that was...
You had also mentioned to me that you would have had somebody else on point for the due diligence and the information.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think one of the biggest mistakes that I have made was that I was trying to hold too much onto it for myself. But then actually making this a team effort and involving everybody having other people work on fundraising, for example, for due diligence, super helpful. Also sharing your frustration and sharing your everyday challenges with others, super helpful. It can be a team effort. Of course, the CEO owns this and owns the result, but it can and should be a team effort, in my opinion.
Yeah.
As everything, really.
Yeah. So the magic question, would you start another company? Would you do this journey again?
I don't know. Not for a while. Maybe someday.
For a while?
Maybe someday.
Okay. Maybe after you run away and go backpacking for a little bit?
Maybe, yeah.
Okay. Good. And so what Intel Capital value did we bring? And this is us being very open. What did we bring? What is it that you would ask people as a corporate VC that we can bring you as a founder?
So for me, one of the best things for Intel Capital was that you funded us at a very hard time. So we were following this open source business model, right? Which is very common in Silicon Valley, wasn't very common here. This means that you need to invest maybe a few years without making revenues, but really growing your potential market, growing the open source community, right? So, imagine trying to raise money based on zero revenue, but, open source community numbers. Yeah. With some investors, it doesn't fly so well.
Right.
But Intel just got it at the time. So that was great. And then, of course, the other thing was you, Karen, that I could call you before your coffee in the middle of the night, and we can talk for 4 hours. And so that's very helpful because if being in a very stressful position, you need someone to have your back.
You need to be able to trust and communicate. And I think there were a couple of times that I told you things that you didn't want to hear, but you listened to them because we had that relationship along with Florian. And I don't think he got the morning phone. I thought he was the night shift. But yeah, good. Any questions you want to ask me? I didn't tell you I was going to do this before.
You didn't tell me that.
Yeah? No?
Let me think. So, what is your view on the sort of enterprise big data stage in Europe right now?
Wow. You didn't want to go for the easy question? What's my favorite color?
What's your favorite color?
Okay. Yeah, so one of the things that I knew before I came to Europe, but it really was reinforced over this last year, is that there is a lot of deep tech here, right? And I think that if investors were smart, they would come over to Europe. There are other places that are very hot, Israel, China, et cetera. A US market is overvalued in Silicon Valley. But if you want to come here and have great value, go shopping here, go hunting here. So, yep, good. Well, thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.